So this week, public service workers are being balloted on whether to go on strike. There's a 2% wage offer increase on the table. Public servants want 6.5%. At the same time, we also hear that our civil service is bloated and overstaffed in some areas and desperately understaffed in others. Well, today, the President appointed Professor Somadoda Fikeni as chair of the Public Service Commission and Zukiswa Mqolomba as deputy chair. Their mandate is to take the public service towards a more efficient and ethical future. Professor Fikeni joins us now. Prof, thanks very much for joining us. You're telling me off air that your mandate does not extend to getting involved in these wage talks. I would imagine you've got more than enough on your plate. But let's focus on your mandate, because really what it does mean is that it's about making sure ultimately that every member of staff in a Home Affairs office, every teacher in a classroom, every nurse, every doctor in a state hospital is doing their job efficiently and ethically. Now, I know you were only officially appointed today, but you have been acting in this position since February. So what are the big plans that you're coming up with? What are the key things you've realized need to be done?
Well, the first thing, thank you very much for your congratulatory note. I am humbled and I take this role with a sense of humility. The biggest task is to make sure that the Public Service Commission itself is repositioned so that it is ready for the task. The second one is to make sure that the framework for professionalization of public service is implemented in the country so that right from recruitment to assessment up to progression, succession planning, the interface between the administrative and the political is well managed in a professionalized, non-partisan environment. And the third one is to implement the Public Service Commission Act, which gives effect to the real independence and autonomy of the Public Service Commission. Those are key areas of intervention, but we can go into some individual aspects of it. So we take into account other reforms which are taking place, such as your lifestyle audit, the discussions on how you protect the whistleblowers and the investigators, and all those are part of a package of turning around our public service so that it can do what it was designed to do more effectively, more efficiently, and it must be people-centered.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm hearing that the sort of framework has to be properly sketched out. You have to have a proper goal, really, to know in what direction to push your energies. But what do you do about, I mean, you spoke about hiring the right people, making sure that it's staffed with professionals. We know that we've got a major problem with people who are actually not qualified to do the job. For example, here in Gauteng, doctors and nurses are actually saying, listen, we've got to make sure that CEOs of hospitals know how to run hospitals, have the right qualifications. We are seeing certain CEOs without those qualifications still sitting in those positions. So how quickly can you go from that good overarching principle to saying, look, that person's in the wrong position, we've got to get them out and get them out quickly?
It is very important that we implement this framework of professionalization because the document is already there. It's going to serve before cabinet. It's going to be, also publicized. And that implementation will turn things around if it is implemented the manner it was designed. This was a multi-stakeholder input from professionals, and it was also looking at case studies of different countries on how best performing countries are shaped. And if it is implemented, your performance assessment, your grading of people who have qualifications and those who are not up to the job becomes very important. Consequence management and many other aspects which will begin to filter all those people who happen to hold positions for patronage reasons rather than for competency and professional reasons.
Are you saying that currently your hands are tied if this is not implemented, this framework?
There are possibilities, but all this framework is going to do is to give impetus to that, because for now, it depends on individual departments. We do have, in reality, some policies in place, but sometimes you find that these are not coordinated. Sometimes you find that Department A is able to implement, Department B is not able to implement. But ultimately, it will take Parliament playing its part, it will take executive playing its part, and it will take professionalization of public service to make sure that you no longer have situations such as people not being competent or some people doing business with the state itself whilst being employed by the state.
Look, I understand that people who break the rules, whether through suspected corrupt acts, can be then investigated by law enforcement. But what about the people that are actually not really qualified? I don't understand why you have to wait for this framework. I mean, it might make it quicker, but surely someone can be performance managed, and if they're not properly doing their job, they've got to go. And got to go quickly. I mean, I think the speed is the time frame question is the one I want to ask of you.
Actually, you're correct. But the reality is that on paper, you find some of these provisions are there. Take consequence management. Take instances of people who have been suspended for 5 years, for 8 years, for 2 years, for 3 years, whilst being paid.
Yeah.
That's why a framework of that nature would begin to say, you can take this for this long, but not beyond this point. And it is also very important to say the Zondo Commission and other reports on corruption have given impetus to the notion of saying, let's have this change and let's have it now to make sure that there are no loopholes.
I've got to ask you a question about efficiency. Does it mean less staff in certain areas and more staff in others? Because as soon as we hear efficiency, you think, that means we've got to trim down our civil servants. And we still get criticism that we have too many people employed in certain areas, not enough, say, doctors and nurses in hospitals. Do you have the power to assess areas that need to be trimmed down? And do you have the power to make sure that that trimming down happens if it's needed?
Actually, efficiency is a lot more broader than that. If you can provide service in a village more efficiently, innovatively, in an informal settlement without people having to come to an office only to be told that the network is down, only to be told that today power is out.
Yeah.
That's efficiency. If you could trim on some of those trips and people spending more time on workshops and your productivity index, then that is efficiency because you're saving resources and reprioritizing them to do something else. So efficiency has the whole ecosystem rather than to say you want to cut the number of people here. Yes, of course, in some instances, you may find that you would better deploy people in a certain area. We would provide advice to that effect, but efficiency of public service, as was envisaged in the Chapter 10 of the Constitution, is making sure that you use your resources, whether human or financial, adequately.
Prof, I've got to ask you, I mean, I know that you don't look at SOEs at this point. It might come on board later that it falls under the Public Service Commission. But are you able to tell me where the biggest inefficiencies are? What have you seen? And how quickly will we see action?
Well, the biggest inefficiency is when you have an industrial scale corruption in the public sector. Whether this is in the public service or in the SOE, because you have seen that SOEs that used to declare dividends to government are now limping and having the begging bowels to be bailed out. And also, you would see the collection, let's say by SARS, our inland revenue and so forth, those are the areas which one would say you do have to concentrate on, because right now, whether you take the AG reported local government, provincial and so forth, if you look irregular expenditure, if you look unauthorized expenditure, have pretty much remained the same, especially in local government areas, which means that's where you do have to focus on. SOEs, the same situation. Some of them were declaring dividends in the in the 90s and in the early 2000s, but today they are limping and some struggling to even pay for their own employees.
So a direct line then between the impact of corruption and inefficiency. Thank you so much, Professor Somadoda Fikeni. He's the newly appointed Public Service Commission Chair, and I do hope you'll come back and tell us about the progress that you are making, and we hope you make, in making our public service more efficient and more ethical.